The flight attendant's voice sliced through the cabin, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm going to ask you one last time, move to the back of the plane or I'll call security." Her tone was sharp, clipped, dripping with condescension. But the woman she was addressing didn't flinch. Naomi Carter, composed and poised, raised her eyes to meet the attendant's. "I've already told you," she said, calm and unwavering. "I'm not moving." Her voice was soft, almost soothing, but it carried undeniable power. She was being humiliated in front of everyone. But no one on board had any idea what was about to happen next. Because Naomi Carter wasn't just another passenger. She was the one person who could, and would, change everything. If you believe respect should never depend on appearance, click the subscribe button now, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now let's go back to where it all began. The private jet glistened in the sunlight, sleek and pristine as it waited on the tarmac. Its design was elegant, promising nothing short of luxury to everyone who stepped aboard. Inside, the cabin was a vision of opulence. Plush leather seats, gold-toned details, and that quiet, expensive hush that only exists in places designed for the elite. Passengers moved gracefully through the aisle, their designer bags gliding behind them. Some tapped lazily on their phones. Others sipped champagne poured with precision by the perfectly polished flight crew. Among them was Naomi, mid-30s, dressed in a tailored navy blazer and matching slacks. Her presence wasn't loud, but it turned heads all the same. She didn't seek attention, yet there was something in the way she moved, steady, self-assured, that made people look twice. This wasn't just a trip. It was business. And while no one on that plane knew who Naomi Carter really was, she preferred it that way. Standing at the front of the cabin was Lauren Pierce, the lead flight attendant. Early 40s, neat bun, uniform pressed to perfection. She moved with the confidence of someone used to being in control. Her smile flickered on and off like a switch, changing depending on who she was greeting. When the Thompsons boarded, a retired couple in their 60s, Lauren lit up. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. Lovely to have you back." Mrs. Thompson nodded politely, already reaching for her knitting. Her husband gave a tight smile, unfolding his newspaper. But when Naomi stepped in, Lauren's tone cooled. Her smile flattened. "Welcome aboard," she said curtly, moving on without another glance. Naomi noticed. Of course she did. But she gave no reaction, only walking calmly toward her assigned seat. As Lauren passed through the cabin offering small talk and refreshments, her demeanor stayed pleasant, until she neared Naomi again. She shot a glance at the bag under Naomi's seat, lips pressed in a thin line. No offer of water. No greeting. Just silence. Have you ever been in a situation where someone treated you differently based on how you looked? If so, tell us your story in the comments. You're not alone. Lauren continued moving through the cabin, her polished shoes tapping softly against the aisle. But something about Naomi unsettled her. It wasn't her outfit or her seat, it was her composure. Her quiet confidence. Lauren didn't like it. To her, Naomi didn't belong in that seat, in that section, or on this plane at all. And she was about to make that known. She returned, standing tall, her expression tight behind a forced smile. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said. "I believe you're in the wrong section." Naomi looked up. "Come. So." "No," she replied evenly. "This is my seat." Lauren's smile didn't falter, but her tone sharpened. "This area is for elite passengers only." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "You might want to double-check the passenger list," she said, "before making assumptions." Around them, passengers began to notice. A woman in pearls leaned in, clearly enjoying the drama. Across the aisle, a businessman frowned, picking up on Lauren's tone. Lauren stiffened. "I don't need to check the list," she said. "I know who's supposed to be here." The tension in the cabin tightened like a wire. Some passengers whispered. Others pretended not to hear. One muttered, "Why doesn't she just move if she's in the wrong seat?" Another shrugged. "She probably snuck up here for an upgrade." Lauren's voice rose again, just loud enough for the cabin to hear. "If you don't move to the back of the plane right now, I'll call security." Naomi tilted her head, her tone never changing. "Call whoever you need to. I'm not moving." A soft gasp came from the socialite in row 4. The businessman leaned forward, watching intently. Lauren, now flushed with frustration, turned to her junior crew member. "Grace," she snapped. "Escort her to the back. Now." Grace, young and clearly nervous, hesitated, eyes flicking between Lauren and Naomi. And right there, in that moment, the quiet became electric. Because no one yet knew who Naomi Carter was. But they were about to find out. The tension between Naomi and Lauren had reached a boiling point. Grace, the junior flight attendant, stood frozen, her instincts telling her to speak up, to mention the passenger list like Naomi had suggested. But one sharp glare from Lauren was all it took to silence her. Defeated, Grace nodded slowly and stepped forward. Naomi shifted in her seat, not out of fear but deliberate calm. Her voice was soft but carried unmistakable weight. "You might want to think carefully about what you're doing," she said, her eyes locked on Lauren's. Lauren scoffed. "I know exactly what I'm doing," she snapped, brushing off Naomi's warning. "Now get up. If someone treated you this way mid-flight, what would you do? Let us know in the comments, and if you're hooked on this story, hit like and subscribe for more." Lauren's voice grew sharper, her gestures more impatient. "You're not supposed to be here," she insisted again, now speaking loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. The cabin fell into an awkward silence, the kind that makes your skin prickle. The air felt heavier with each word. Naomi leaned back ever so slightly, still as composed as ever. "You really shouldn't make assumptions about people," she said evenly. Lauren crossed her arms, her smirk returning. "And you shouldn't sit in a seat you didn't pay for." That's when Naomi picked up her phone. Calm, unbothered, she typed a quick message and set it gently back on the armrest. "You're making a mistake," she said, not in anger, but in certainty. Lauren rolled her eyes. "We'll see about that." She gestured once more toward Grace, now visibly uncomfortable. Grace stepped forward, but hesitation clung to her movements. She glanced at Naomi, then back at Lauren. The longer Naomi remained seated, the more Lauren's authority seemed to slip through her fingers. Naomi wasn't arguing. She wasn't yelling. She was simply there, unshakable. And that quiet strength was driving Lauren mad. Passengers watched the scene unfold like a play they couldn't look away from. Whispers floated through the cabin, some shocked, others intrigued. Lauren's frustration finally burst. "I'm going to ask you one last time," she barked, her voice slicing through the air. "Move to the back of the plane or I'll call security." Naomi met her glare with steady eyes. "I've already told you. I'm not moving." It wasn't a challenge. It was a truth. And everyone in the cabin heard it. A well-dressed woman in the row ahead, dripping in diamonds and entitlement, leaned toward her seatmate, speaking just loud enough to be overheard. "She's clearly trying to get a free ride," she whispered. Lauren latched onto the comment like a lifeline. "Exactly," she said, turning toward the passengers as if trying to rally support. "We have policies for a reason. Some people just don't respect them." Still, Naomi said nothing. She didn't defend herself. She didn't flinch. Her silence wasn't submission, it was power. Grace took a tentative step toward the cockpit door, where the flight's passenger list was clipped to a panel. Her fingers hovered over the page. She wanted to check, needed to, but before she could speak, Lauren's voice cut through again. "Grace, what do you think you're doing?" Grace turned slowly. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I was just checking." "I've got this under control," Lauren snapped. "You don't need to get involved." Grace backed off, cheeks burning. She bit her lip, torn between what she knew was right and her fear of crossing the line. As the unease in the cabin grew, a man across the aisle finally broke the silence. Middle-aged, calm, dressed in a tailored gray suit, he leaned slightly toward Naomi and spoke gently. "Excuse me," he said. "Is everything all right?" Naomi turned to him, her face softening. "Yes, thank you," she said. Her voice was steady, but there was a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. Before the man could say anything else, Lauren stepped in again, her tone edged with accusation. "Sir, I'd appreciate it if you didn't encourage the disruption." The businessman raised an eyebrow. "From where I'm sitting," he said calmly, "you're the one causing the scene." Lauren's cheeks flushed, her anger bubbling beneath the surface. She turned back to Naomi, pointing a finger at her. "I've had enough," she snapped. "Either you move, or I'll make sure you're escorted off this plane." Naomi didn't blink. "You can try," she said softly. That quiet reply was the final straw. Lauren's hands trembled slightly as she leaned in, her voice shaking with fury. "Why don't you just admit you're in the wrong seat and stop wasting everyone's time?" Naomi's silence answered for her. There was nothing more to say. Lauren finally backed away, muttering under her breath as she turned to resume her duties. She moved quickly down the aisle, her heels tapping with restrained rage. In her hands, she carried a tray of sparkling water, her posture still professional but her jaw set tight. Naomi sat quietly, opening the book she'd brought. She didn't look back. The other passengers whispered again, but the tension was beginning to shift. Respect was starting to replace suspicion. If only just... Lauren moved up and down the cabin, avoiding Naomi completely. She served Mr. and Mrs. Thompson with a polite smile, then moved to the rear without ever making eye contact with the woman she had tried to humiliate. Naomi waited patiently. Her mouth was dry. She'd seen Lauren serve water to every other passenger around her. Still, she said nothing, until the moment came. "Excuse me," Naomi asked gently, "could I have some water, please?" Lauren paused, eyes locking onto hers with cold disdain. "I'll get to you when I can," she said curtly, then walked past without another word. Naomi's gaze followed her retreating figure, but she said nothing. She didn't need to. Would you have spoken up if you'd seen that happen in real life? Drop your answer in the comments below. Minutes ticked by. Naomi shifted slightly in her seat, extending one leg gently into the aisle to stretch. It was a subtle, harmless move. But when Lauren returned, she saw it, and pounced. Rather than ask her to adjust her leg, Lauren made a deliberate decision. And that's where we'll pick up next. Lauren's steps clipped briskly down the aisle, then came the moment no one saw coming. Without warning, her foot struck Naomi's outstretched leg. The tray tilted sharply and several glasses of water toppled forward, cascading over Naomi's lap and splashing onto the floor. The gasp Lauren let out was theatrical, sharp, and loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "Watch where you're putting your legs," she snapped, pointing accusingly. "You've caused a mess." Heads turned. Startled passengers glanced around in confusion, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Naomi blinked, startled but still composed. She calmly brushed at her damp trousers and looked up at Lauren. "But you walked into my leg," she replied evenly, her tone neither defensive nor apologetic, just steady. Then she said something that made the entire cabin pause. "I've only asked to be treated with the same respect as everyone else. And if that's too much to ask, maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here." Her words didn't shout, but they cut deeper than any raised voice. A quiet but powerful rebuke, ringing louder than the chaos around her. Lauren's face flushed with rage. Her authority, her control, her dominance, slipping away. She stepped closer, her jaw clenched, her composure cracking. "You think you can talk to me like that?" she hissed. And then, something no one expected. Without hesitation, Lauren raised her hand and struck Naomi across the face. The sound cracked like thunder across the cabin. The slap echoed, sharp, vile, undeniable. Gasps erupted. The businessman from earlier stood halfway out of his seat, disbelief and fury etched across his face. Grace's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide in horror. Even the nosy socialite, who had earlier smirked at Naomi's presence, now looked visibly shaken. Naomi's cheek turned, but she didn't flinch. She slowly straightened her posture, placing her hands gently on her lap. Her expression remained poised. Her eyes, though, those eyes were filled with something different now. A quiet storm. She locked her gaze on Lauren. "You just made the worst mistake of your life," Naomi said, her voice cool and even, like ice spreading across a glass surface. "Now, let me ask you, what would you do in Naomi's shoes? Would you have stayed calm? Let us know in the comments. And if this story has you glued to your screen, hit like and subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next." Lauren's anger boiled. She leaned in again, louder this time, trying to reclaim control. "You crossed the line the moment you boarded this plane," she spat. "You've been disruptive since the beginning." But Naomi didn't blink. She didn't touch her face. She didn't raise her voice. She simply straightened her shoulders and stared into Lauren's eyes. "I've been patient," she said. "But your behavior crossed the line the moment you made assumptions based on how I look. You've embarrassed yourself, not me." There was power in her restraint. Authority in her calm. "You'll regret that," Naomi added, soft and final. Lauren faltered, her confidence cracking for the first time. She scoffed, but the sound didn't carry like it used to. "Oh please. What are you going to do? Call the police?" Naomi didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence was deafening. And then something changed. From the corner of the cabin, Grace moved. The young flight attendant had seen everything. Her heart had been pounding from the start, but now, she couldn't stay silent. She slipped discreetly toward the galley, pulled out her phone, and dialed quickly. Her voice, though hushed, carried resolve. "This is Grace. We've got a serious situation on board," she said. A passenger was assaulted. By the time she returned to her post, her face had changed. She no longer looked afraid. She looked ready. Meanwhile, Lauren, still oblivious, stood with arms folded tightly across her chest, her authority crumbling minute by minute. She didn't realize just how many people were watching now, or how many had stopped seeing Naomi as just another passenger. "Are you okay?" a woman across the aisle asked Naomi gently, her voice barely a whisper. Naomi gave a soft nod. "I'm fine," she said. "Thank you." The cabin had grown eerily quiet. Only the hum of the engines remained, a low vibration beneath the silence. Naomi sat still, her clothes damp, her composure unbroken. "All you had to do was treat me like any other person," she said softly. "But you couldn't do that, could you? Because in your mind, someone who looks like me doesn't belong here." Lauren's grip on the tray tightened. "Respect?" she spat. "Maybe you should earn it. People like you don't deserve mine." The words dropped like stones. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably. Others looked away ashamed. Naomi's expression darkened for the first time. "You shouldn't have said that." Her voice was still quiet, but it struck like a match in a dark room. Lauren folded her arms again, trying to regain control. "I've been more than patient," she scoffed. "Maybe now you'll understand that actions have consequences." "You're right," Naomi replied. "They do." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving Lauren's. "And you're about to find out just how true that is." For a brief moment, Lauren hesitated. Something in Naomi's tone, so calm, so certain, sent a chill down her spine. But she quickly masked it with a sneer. "I'm not afraid of your empty threats," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "You're the one who'll regret this. Not me." But somewhere deep inside, even she wasn't so sure. Lauren turned away, trying to project confidence, but her steps faltered slightly. Something inside her had shifted. She'd crossed a line, and though she wasn't ready to admit it, not even to herself, she felt it. The looks from the other passengers, Grace's pale, stunned expression, and Naomi's unwavering calm, each was a mirror showing Lauren exactly who she'd become in that moment. And she didn't like what she saw. She clenched her jaw, shaking her head as if that could silence the guilt echoing through her mind. Why didn't she fight back? Why didn't she scream? Why did she say "I'd regret it" so calmly? Her anger, once burning and righteous in her mind, now flickered uncertainly beneath growing unease. Naomi hadn't yelled, hadn't raised a hand, but her silence had carried more weight than a room full of voices. For the first time, Lauren's certainty cracked. Doubt seeped in. She stole a glance around the cabin, looking, hoping, for someone to back her up. But those same passengers who had looked to her for leadership were now avoiding her eyes. The businessman's arms were folded, his jaw set in silent judgment. The once curious socialite whispered to her companion, now shaking her head in clear disapproval. Even Grace, sweet, obedient Grace, stood frozen, clutching the passenger manifest with trembling fingers and wide, worried eyes. And then there was Naomi, seated calmly, legs crossed, leaning ever so slightly back in her chair. She wasn't angry. She wasn't rattled. If anything, she looked powerful. Her stillness was commanding, more effective than any threat. And that made Lauren nervous. Naomi didn't have to raise her voice. Her presence said it all. Lauren paced briefly, biting the inside of her cheek, trying to regain her footing. But the tension in the air was like thick fog, impossible to shake. It wrapped around her, suffocating. Naomi's voice echoed in her memory, "You're making a mistake." And she was starting to believe it. What the flight crew didn't know, what Lauren hadn't realized, was that Naomi's calm wasn't surrender. It was precision. She had already taken action. Her response to the slap wasn't weakness. It was strategy. Now let me ask you, if someone treated you this way on a flight, what would you do? Drop a comment below. And if you're caught up in this story, smash that like button and subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. Naomi reached for her phone with unhurried grace. She typed quickly, her expression unchanged, then set the phone on the armrest beside her. It looked like a small gesture, but Lauren felt the power behind it. "What are you doing?" Lauren snapped, her voice a touch higher than she intended. "Is that some kind of threat?" Naomi didn't even glance up. She just leaned back slightly and replied, calm as ever, "You'll find out soon enough." Passengers leaned in. A whisper swept through the cabin like a ripple across still water. The socialite turned to her companion. "What's going on? Do you think she's someone important?" The businessman across the aisle, who had said little up until now, tilted his head slightly, tapping his fingers against the armrest as he studied Naomi. Then, almost to himself, he murmured, "I had a feeling." Moments later, the cockpit door opened. The pilot stepped out, his face pale and serious. He didn't glance around the room. He moved straight toward Lauren, each step measured and deliberate. Lauren straightened, visibly tense. "Captain, is something wrong?" she asked quickly, trying to reassert control. The pilot didn't break stride. He stopped in front of her and spoke in a firm, steady voice. "Miss Reed, I need you to step aside." Lauren blinked. "Excuse me?" "You need to step aside," he repeated. "I've received a direct call from the company's executive management. The owner of this aircraft is on board." He paused, then gestured toward Naomi. "It's Ms. Naomi Williams." The words dropped like a lightning strike. Gasps erupted throughout the cabin. "She owns the plane?" the socialite whispered, stunned. The businessman simply nodded. "Makes sense." Grace let out a quiet breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. A wave of relief, and maybe something close to admiration, washed over her face. Naomi didn't move. She didn't need to. The room was moving around her now. Lauren, on the other hand, was frozen. Her face turned crimson. That can't be right," she stammered, her voice cracking. "There has to be some mistake." The cabin had gone eerily silent again, except for the steady thrum of the engines. Everyone was watching now. Naomi slowly turned her gaze toward Lauren. No smile. No anger. Just truth. "No mistake," she said quietly. And then came the captain's voice over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be making an unscheduled landing. Please remain seated and prepare for descent." Murmurs rippled once more. The businessman leaned slightly toward Naomi and whispered, "Is this for you?" Naomi gave the faintest of smiles. "It's time for a conversation. What would you do if the person you mistreated turned out to be the one holding all the cards? Let us know in the comments. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe, because Naomi's just getting started." The moment the wheels touched down, the hush in the cabin deepened. Naomi said nothing. She didn't need to. Her expression was serene, composed yet unreadable. Lauren, however, was unraveling. Her brow furrowed, her usual confidence faltering. She glanced nervously toward the cockpit, her nerves now clashing with the memory of everything she'd just done. The plane rolled to a gentle stop. Outside the window, a sleek black SUV glided to a halt at the base of the stairs. Two sharply dressed assistants stepped out, moving with swift, practiced efficiency. They didn't hesitate. They didn't question. They climbed the aircraft steps like they belonged, and they did. As they entered the cabin, their posture alone commanded attention. One of them turned toward Naomi and greeted her warmly. "Miss Williams," they said, their tone respectful, almost reverent. "Everything is ready for your review." Gasps spread through the cabin like wildfire. Lauren stood frozen. Her face drained of color, her posture stiff with disbelief. The name rang in her ears like an alarm she couldn't silence. "Miss Williams," she whispered, barely audible. But the assistants ignored her completely. Their focus remained solely on Naomi. "Is there anything you need before we proceed?" one asked, bowing slightly. Naomi rose from her seat with quiet grace. She adjusted her navy blazer, her movements fluid and assured, every inch of her radiating power. The silence in the cabin grew heavier with awe and tension. Then at last Naomi spoke. Her voice was steady, clear, and impossible to ignore. "My name is Naomi Williams," she said, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces. "I'm the owner of this plane, and I also happen to own this airline." The silence shattered. Lauren's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. All the bravado, all the snide smirks and dismissive glares, gone. In their place stood a woman stripped of power, panic rising visibly in her trembling hands and flushed cheeks. Naomi turned to face her, eyes level, voice sharp but composed. "Lauren," she began, "your behavior today was nothing short of disgraceful." The words cut through the still air like a blade. "You humiliated yourself. You disrespected a passenger. And in doing so, you've tarnished the reputation of this entire company." Lauren tried to speak. I didn't know," but Naomi raised a hand, silencing her. "No," Naomi said firmly. "You didn't know because you didn't care. You didn't ask. You didn't show me the respect that should be offered to every customer, regardless of how they look or what seat they're in." Around them, murmurs of agreement rose. Heads nodded. Even the once silent passengers now found their voices. Mr. Raymond folded his newspaper neatly and gave Naomi an approving nod. Mrs. Raymond paused her knitting to offer polite applause. Naomi remained poised, her posture confident but not boastful. "There was no mistake here," she continued. "Not in your words, not in your actions. You made assumptions. You exercised poor judgment. And now you'll deal with the consequences." Lauren's eyes darted around the room, desperate for support, but there was none. Just blank stares, disapproval, and more than a few phones discreetly recording every moment. Naomi stepped closer, her voice low but commanding. "You failed to do your job," she said. "And while you were busy judging me, you forgot that respect isn't optional, it's fundamental. Your position requires professionalism. You showed none." Lauren's hands trembled. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, to do anything, but no words came. Naomi turned to the pilot. "I want this addressed immediately," she said coolly. "And I want safeguards in place to ensure this never happens to another passenger again." The pilot nodded solemnly. "Understood, Miss Williams." Lauren took an instinctive step toward the exit, but the pilot quickly stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice firm. Naomi's voice followed, resolute. "Lauren, your actions today prove you're unfit to serve in this role. Effective immediately, you're fired." Her words hung in the air like a final verdict. Lauren's composure shattered. Her shoulders slumped. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Miss Williams, I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean to get caught," Naomi replied coldly. "But you did. And now you'll be held accountable." At that moment, 2 uniformed police officers stepped aboard the aircraft. A new wave of gasps swept the cabin. "Miss Williams," one officer said respectfully, "we received your report. Are you pressing charges?" Naomi's gaze didn't waver. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "This woman assaulted me in front of dozens of witnesses. I expect her to be held accountable." Lauren gasped. "Wait, no, this is a misunderstanding. I didn't mean to." But the officer stepped forward, already reaching for his cuffs. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for assault. You have the right to remain silent." Lauren's breathing quickened. Her hands were cuffed behind her back. Her eyes flicked helplessly to Naomi, who remained calm, unreadable, and unshaken. This was the moment Lauren realized there was no escape. The reckoning had arrived. She sobbed as she was led down the aisle, her confident facade reduced to tears and pleading. "I'm sorry, Miss Williams," she wept. "Please?" But Naomi simply replied, "An apology means nothing without accountability. You made your choices. Now you face the consequences." Passengers watched silently, some with open mouths, others recording on their phones as Lauren disappeared through the exit. And then Naomi turned back to the cabin, standing tall. "To all of you," she began, her voice composed, "I apologize for what you've had to witness today. This is not the standard of service I expect on any flight under my leadership." She took a breath, then continued. "Going forward, every passenger, regardless of race, status, or appearance, will be treated with dignity and respect." Applause broke out across the cabin. It started soft, but quickly built into enthusiastic clapping. Mr. Raymond gave a cheer. Mrs. Raymond set down her knitting to clap as well. Naomi turned to Grace, the junior flight attendant, who stood quietly nearby. "Let's talk," Naomi said with a soft smile. Younger flight attendant who had quietly supported her throughout the ordeal, "Grace," Naomi said, her tone softening, "I noticed your professionalism today. Thank you for stepping up when it mattered. You'll be hearing from my office about a promotion." Grace's eyes widened and she nodded quickly, her face lighting up with gratitude. "Thank you, Miss Williams," she said softly. Naomi smiled briefly before stepping toward the exit, her assistant following closely behind. The plane's atmosphere had shifted completely, the earlier tension replaced by admiration and relief. Justice had been served, and Naomi had set an example that no one on that flight would forget. Do you think Lauren deserves forgiveness, or should she face the consequences of her actions? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Passengers smiled at the interaction, the warmth of the moment spreading through the cabin. The nosy woman who had watched the entire ordeal with wide-eyed fascination leaned forward in her seat. "Miss Williams, you're amazing," she blurted out, her admiration shining brightly. Naomi turned toward her, a gentle smile gracing her lips. "Thank you," she replied. "Remember this moment, it's always worth standing up for what's right." As Naomi stepped off the plane, the fresh air of the tarmac greeted her. The black SUV waited patiently, its driver holding the door open. Her assistants walked beside her, briefing her on her next meeting, but Naomi's thoughts lingered on the events of the day. Later, in a televised interview, Naomi sat in a sleek studio, her demeanor as poised as ever. The interviewer leaned forward, clearly captivated. "Miss Williams, your story has gone viral. Millions of people have seen how you handled this situation. What message do you hope to send?" Naomi's gaze was steady as she answered, her voice clear and resolute. Respect is a right, not a privilege. Everyone deserves dignity, no matter how they look, where they come from, or what others assume about them. True leadership is about setting that standard and ensuring it's upheld. The interviewer nodded, visibly moved. And what would you say to those who face similar challenges but don't have the platform you do? Naomi's expression softened. I'd say that strength comes from within. Even when you feel invisible, remember your worth. You don't need a title or wealth to demand respect. You just need to stand firm in who you are. A few weeks later, Naomi boarded another flight, this time greeted by a different crew. The energy was warm, welcoming, and professional. The lead flight attendant greeted her with a genuine smile. "Welcome aboard, Miss Williams. It's an honor to have you." Naomi returned the smile as she settled into her seat. The atmosphere felt lighter, the service impeccable, but more importantly, it was filled with respect. As she gazed out the window, watching the runway blur into the sky, a sense of peace washed over her. The events of that day had left a lasting impact, not just on the passengers and crew who had witnessed it, but on everyone who had seen the story unfold. Naomi knew that her actions had turned an injustice into a lesson, one that would ripple far beyond that single flight. She smiled, knowing that sometimes the most powerful victories weren't about winning, they were about inspiring change. As the passengers settled into their seats, Naomi quietly reached for her phone. In the aftermath of what had unfolded, she knew this wasn't just about her. It was about changing a system that allowed prejudice and assumptions to thrive. As the jet climbed higher into the clouds, Naomi settled into her seat at the front of the plane. The window beside her framed a breathtaking view of the horizon, the world below fading into a sea of blue and white. She gazed out at the endless sky, a sense of peace washing over her. This wasn't just about confronting prejudice or asserting her authority, it was about turning a moment of humiliation into a powerful lesson, one that would ripple far beyond this single flight. Naomi smiled to herself, her reflection faintly visible in the window. She knew this was just the beginning. With every decision, every policy, and every act of leadership, she was shaping a future where respect and kindness were the standard, not the exception. The plane soared higher, the engines humming softly as it moved toward its destination. And Naomi, seated at the helm of her vision, felt a quiet triumph that no turbulence could ever shake. In a public statement released shortly after the flight, Naomi spoke directly to the world. Her words carried a message that resonated far beyond the confines of the jet. Luxury isn't about appearances. It's about the experience we create for everyone. True success is measured not by what you can afford but by how you treat others. This is why I'm implementing new policies across my airline, to ensure that every passenger, no matter who they are, feels valued and respected. The statement sparked conversations across social media, with people applauding Naomi's leadership and her commitment to change. Hashtags like #RespectAboveAll and #NowMissVision trended for days, inspiring others to reflect on their own behavior and biases. If you love the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share it with people around you.